Yeah, got it. Hello, Dan or Tom?
It's starting now.
Yeah, I know, but I still wanted to make the point. Good morning. Anybody?
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Tom Coates, and welcome to the January 2024 meeting of the Richmond Ions Community Group. And welcome to our 28th anniversary. We began having these meetings in January of 1996, and we've been good to go all these years. I think we're probably the oldest continuously operating group in the global network, which sadly because of COVID is much smaller than it used to be. But because during COVID, a great number of groups just ceased to exist, and many have not reconstituted yet. Some have, and so forth. We missed 1 month trying to get our Zoom up to speed, and that was it, and been going ever since, and we've been very blessed to be able to do that, and that is all because of the support we have from each of you and those online and those who have supported our group all these years. Ions, as most of you know, but I'll Bryce, you have a question?
You said we're blessed. We're blessed by who?
We're going to talk about that later.
All right.
I'll get back to it, Your Honor. I'll connect it up.
Okay, all right.
Anyway, IONS, for those who don't know, is a shorthand for the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is an organization founded in 1973 by Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell was the lunar landing module pilot for Apollo 14. He was a Navy test pilot, had a PhD in aeronautical engineering, very scientifically oriented and action oriented as well. But on his way back from the moon, after having walked on the moon, he had a takeaway like a number of those people did. In his case, the takeaway was a unity consciousness experience that happened to him, before him, and with him, within him, when he was viewing the Earth from roughly 250,000 miles away as a pale blue dot in space, and it was a transcendent experience for him. And he decided as a result of that experience to dedicate the rest of his life to exploring the frontiers of consciousness, especially the interface between science and spirit. And so IONS, a couple of years later, well, I guess the Apollo 14 was in 1970 or 71, I can't remember which. IONS was the vehicle that was created for that purpose, and it's still going today. It's had some ups and downs and so forth, but we'll the creek don't rise. We will continue. It will continue, and we will continue. I would say too that in the last 3 years or so, well, maybe 4 years now, since COVID came along, IONS has upped its profile online tremendously. They have lots and lots of online programs. You don't have to be a member of IONS per se to participate in many of their online programs. I would encourage you all to check the IONS website and join into that organization if you can or so inclined. It is a great organization, and it does depend solely on contributions, donations, and so forth for its existence. As we do here, which brings me to the next important topic of the preamble to this meeting, and that is that we have our own expenses locally, and they're not huge, but they are something, and so we depend entirely on the contributions of those who attend our meetings, either in person or online, for our existence. We have a a basket on the table in the back, and someone will be passing that around to those who have not contributed on the way in the door. And we ask you to find the point of intersection between the depth of your wallet and the depth of your heart, and wherever they intersect, and make that the point you put in the basket. And whatever there's no requirement that you contribute anything, but we can't exist without contributions, so we encourage everyone here to make whatever contribution you possibly can. So you can get wonderful speakers like the one we have lined up today. And so, in any event, well, what else have we got? As I say, this is our 28th anniversary. I'd like to recognize the members of our steering committee, because they always, it's without which we would not exist either. The members of Martha, is Martha not here yet? Not yet. Martha will have to wait to be recognized when she gets here. We have Susanna Calvert is on the steering committee. We have Elizabeth Kuhn, who is not here in person, but she handles our web stuff. Dan is not on our steering committee per se, but he's an ex officio member, or an unofficial member, because without him we couldn't operate the Zoom, and we wouldn't have a microphone or all those things. And and I'd also like Bunny also is not here today. She's visiting her family in Florida, but she's been on the steering committee for, I think, about 15 years now. And I'm the sole surviving original member of this group. So that's why I get to talk today. You know? What else? Carol Louie, I'd like to recognize today because she was a member of our steering committee for a long time. She's been a presenter on several occasions, and she also, as for today, has brought us the 28th anniversary cake to celebrate this occasion. So I'd like to give a shout out to her and recognize her for that. What else is, oh, Susanna, you need to announce the Wednesday series.
I'll just add, so much deep gratitude to Tom for stewarding this boat for so many years and for 28 years. And the success of this organization is because of him, largely. As you know, IONS has partnered with the Sanctuary of Earth, which offers a spiritual practice speaker the first Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. We decided to keep it in that slot. Thank you for those who responded to the survey. Our next speaker is J. Kyle Howard from San Diego, and he's going to be talking about how to unlock divine blessings with the power of faith. And he's going to teach us how to manifest efficiently and effectively. And Dan, you're going to put the link for that in the chat. Did you already?
No, I didn't. I will.
Okay, so I also just want to remind everybody that we also have classes right now on spiritual practice. We are doing clairvoyance now, and we're going to start clair empathy on February 27th. This is by hybrid, so you can come in person or by Zoom. So Dan will put the link to that in the chat as well, and I'm going to pass the flyers. And if you want to sign up for the email list, you can sign up here. If you've signed up before, you don't have to sign up again. I got you. So thank you so much. And I'll walk around with extra handouts for the speaker, if anybody can get it.
One thing that many, if not most of you know about that's changed for me since I was last a speaker before this group is that I am now a newlywed. And today, my beautiful wife, Isabel, is going to do the opening meditation for the meeting. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. Can you hear me well? Well, thank you for being here and this wonderful occasion to celebrate the 28th birthday of this wonderful community. So let's sit in a comfortable position and close our eyes. And we are going to take the opportunity to connect with ourselves and with everybody else. So close your eyes and take nice, long, deep breaths. Focus on your heart center and connect with the person that is next to you from the heart space, and connect with the person that is in the room, every person that is in the room. And honor that person. Let's honor their path. Because when we honor their path, we are honoring our path. So let's take the opportunity to wish everyone what we wish for ourselves. We want peace, love, health, wisdom, harmony. So let's wish that for everyone else. In Lakesh, I am you and you and me. And connecting with everyone, we dissolve the illusion of separation. We honor here today everyone who is involved in this community and make possible that we expand our knowledge, our conscious. Every single bright, brilliant mind that has been here, that have been here, sharing with us their paths. So we can find tools to find a better way to live. I honor you. I honor your path. I honor my path. In Lakesh, you are me, I am you. Now take a nice deep breath. And open your eyes. And now let's get ready for this juicy talk that we're about to receive. Let's enjoy. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, mi amor. I have to confess, I'll say I was inspired to this subject initially by the events going on in Gaza, and before that, the events in Israel. I have to say that I have experienced a lot of internal anxiety about speaking about God. And I think part of that is because, at least when I was growing up in our culture, this is something that we are taught is left to be others, left to others, is to be left to others to speak about it, specifically the priesthoods and so forth. And in my case, and I suspect in the case of many of those who are in this room, and also those who would generally be attracted to the path that most of us in this room consider ourselves to be on, issues relating to what we call God have been matters which, perhaps, I know in my own case, in more than one lifetime, have resulted in my being tortured, imprisoned, or killed. And so this also creates some degree of anxiety at the idea of getting up and speaking on this subject, particularly within the framework of a Protestant church. And so I don't take this lightly, but I also don't want to get too serious with it, because none of us can know but so much on this subject. But it is a subject that the reason it came to mind in the context initially of the current conflict in Israel, Gaza, and between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is that it did occur to me that part of that conflict, if not the great majority of that conflict, is generated by ideas about God. And even though the people that are having these conflicts are ethnically, well, it's not ethnically in terms of their religious grouping, but in terms of their ancestral heritage, in terms of their genetic stock and all that. They're the same people. They're just like the Catholics and the Protestants in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And so this obviously has been a subject upon which many lives have been lost for a long, long period of time. In the particular area that I'm talking about now, we know of the fact that this has been going on pretty relentlessly for the last 3,000 plus years. And so I thought this subject would be appropriate in that context. I also think it's appropriate in the context of our own society, not just because of religious issues or anti-Semitism issues and so forth, but because our society is so disconnected. There's such a sense of being untethered to anything meaningful among such a large portion of our population, that we experience the same kinds of let's say, vicissitudes as are going on in Palestine, except on a more individualistic level. We have mass shootings almost every day, someplace in the country. One of my I mean, things don't have to be about shootings either. One of the more recent stories that attracted my attention was a story involving a family in the Tampa area, and on Christmas Eve, the family was at Christmas shopping, and there was a 14-year-old boy and a 15-year-old boy, and the 14-year-old boy got angry that he thought his 15-year-old brother was getting more presents than he was getting, and so they finished the shopping and went to the grandmother's house of the children. And the 14-year-old was continuing to get angrier and angrier. Had a 22-year-old sister who had her own baby a few months old, and she was trying to calm down the 14-year-old, and he got so angry with her that he pulled out his 9mm that he carried in his pocket. Of course, he's 14 years old, exercising his Second Amendment rights, and shot his sister in the heart and killed her while she was holding a young baby. The 15-year-old then, in reprisal for that, pulled out his .45 and automatic and pistol and shot the 14-year-old. These are family members, but this shows how the level of disconnect that has taken place in some quarters of our society. I read a story, it flashed up on my screen last night of a fellow, again in Florida, who was about 60 years old. He was engaged to a woman who was 59, and they were scheduled to be married in a month or so, and he apparently, without warning to her, he picked up a baseball bat and bludgeoned her to death. It didn't quite kill her with a baseball bat, so he finished her off by strangling her, and explained to the police that he had to do it because he was feeling badly because he didn't have the money to pay for the wedding. So I mean, it's comical, but it's a testament to the level of lack of connection between ourselves, among ourselves, and to the source of our being, which pervades not only our society, but people across the world. And I believe, perhaps I'm wrong, and I hate to talk about beliefs, as most of you know who've ever heard me speak before. I'll tell you right now, don't believe anything I tell you. I'm not here to tell you the truth, I'm just here to get you to think about things. But I believe that our ideas of the way things are, our ideas about what is real and what is not, and what in terms of the specific topic of today, what is God, and how are we connected or not connected with that, if that exists, has a lot to do with these kinds of issues. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile to explore these subjects. We had a wonderful presentation was it May, Rob? Did you talk? Called about God and the Old Testament and so forth. I'm going to rehash some of that. But my inquiry is about what I just mentioned, and why I think some of the history that we have relates to it, and with some potential ideas of what we might do about it. It's not, it's taken us at least 6,000 or 7,000 years to get where we are, maybe a lot longer than that, so it's not something we're going to snap our fingers and fix overnight. But at least we can start thinking about it on something, potentially on a collective level. As to why we have this phenomena that we have. One of the things I think that it is clear from our issues is that not only is there a sense of disconnect, there's a sense of separation, and our ideas about reality, I think, are connected deeply to that sense of separation that so many people have. And I think worldwide there's a sense of separation all over the place, no matter what the religious tradition is. But I do think that's there, and that is something that we can potentially move forward and change. I'm gonna rehash for those who don't remember some of what we know about how ideas of a God began. I would say that from the shamanic standpoint, in traditional societies, and for anybody who's ever spent any significant time with nature, in the woods, in the wilderness, if you will, there is one can develop pretty easily, in my experience, a sense that when you're immersed in nature, out in the mountains or wherever, one can develop a sense of the spirit in everything, the aliveness of everything that's around you. The rocks, the trees, everything there is filled with spirit. And if you're in a difficult situation, you can come to the realization that everything you need is right there. You just have to open up and allow it to be there for you. And this is why in traditional societies the pattern is what we would call animism, to attribute spirit to everything and to find spirit in everything and to treat celestial bodies like the sun and the moon as godly figures. And so that would be probably our earliest instincts if we had not been taught otherwise, because that, if we stuck with it, would have been probably given us a continuing greater sense of connection that we have, and less sense of separation. But what we know from the stories that have come down through the Old Testament, and also through things like the writings of Zechariah Sitchin and others, is that the story of our civilization, going back at least the last 6,000 years or so, tells a story of groups who came to this planet from other planets, specifically a group called the Anunnaki, and they were supposedly from another planet in our solar system that we do not know about, named Nibiru. That is a planet that is supposed to have a 3,600 year rotation around our sun, and that part of the lore of this is that there's also another sun that's connected to our planet that we don't yet know about. Not connected to our planet, connected to our solar system, and that Nibiru is actually around that planet, but occasionally, every 3,600 years ago, around that sun, but occasionally every 3,600 years it comes around ours. And so, well, I'm good to see. So anyway, that group, according to the tablets of the Sumeria, various peoples in Sumeria, that go back for about 5,000 to 6,000 years. The lore is that group came to Earth around 450,000 years ago in search of gold, because of the fact that the atmosphere on their own planet was decaying, and they had an idea that if they had gold, they could create gold dust out of it and put it into their atmosphere and reflect the sun and preserve their atmosphere. That's the story anyway, and it's hard to imagine that people in Sumeria 6,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago could have made that up from whole cloth. And so they apparently came here and they started looking for gold. They knew gold was on the planet. They started mining it, and they came to a startling realization that gold mining on the Earth was pretty hard work. And so they needed some worker bees that, other than themselves, to do this work for them. And according to the lore, they took what would have been a proto-human hominid at that time, which would have been Homo erectus, as far as we know, and did some genetic tweaking and tinkering with Homo erectus to create a worker bee. And apparently, Homo erectus was plenty strong, but not very docile, and not very trainable to do gold mining. And so they wanted somebody who was more like what during the 80s, the Soviets described as what their ideal citizen, who was not too smart and not too curious. And so that's why they created what we are today. But they did not create us, according to the story, originally as what we are today. They created us actually as much dumber than we are, and basically as mules. In other words, people who could not reproduce. And that worked fine for quite a while, but apparently there was a rift in heaven between the gods who were doing this, and the original godlike figure was An. The people who came with him and after him were called Anunnaki because they were the sons and daughters of Anu or An, and so. The main two of his children was one called Enlil and another called Enki. And Enlil is the one that was mainly in charge, and Enki supposedly was the one who was what Sitchin always referred to, sort of jokingly, as the science officer. He was the Mr. Spock of the expedition, and so. Enlil was insistent that he wanted these beings to remain dumb mules and good gold miners and nothing else. And Enki had greater aspirations for this species that they had created, and so that conflict was what resulted in Homo sapiens being created. Capable both of higher intellect and also capable of self-replication, reproduction, procreation, around 300 to 350,000 years ago. And interestingly enough, in the Genesis story, Enlil is the god who's condemning the humans for having drinking or eaten of the forbidden fruit. Enki is the character who is represented in Genesis as the was it Satan? I'm not sure what the name.
Serpent.
The serpent. That's right. Yeah, and so from which we probably get today the idea of the serpent of wisdom, which has been an archetype all the way down through history. But by some accounts, what it amounted to, the being banished from the Garden of Eden was not actually being banished. It was escaping from the Garden of Eden, because those who had drunk of this tree of knowledge and had opened up their minds were no longer willing to be slaves to Enlil. And so that is, so the desire to return to the Garden of Eden is beneath the surface is a desire to return to slavery and stupidity. And so the whole thing is twisted upside down and backwards in terms of the presentation in Genesis. But that's essentially what it is. Genesis is a very shortened version of a lot of things that came from the Sumerian tradition. And I wanted to get that background in though, because the story of Genesis, also with Adam and then there was Cain and Abel, is another metaphor for cultural conflict, and that is that both were asked to bring offerings. Cain's offering was an offering of fruit and vegetables. Abel's offering was an offering of an animal that had been killed, a lamb or whatever. And Abel's offering was praised. Cain's was condemned. what that amounts to is what is being told there is a clash of cultures between matriarchies and patriarchy. The new patriarchal society that was coming into being favored killing animals and disfavored farming and cultivation, and more specifically disfavored matriarchy. So what is the story being told there is a story of the tension between the existing matriarchal societies that had existed and predated the time when this thing happened, and those which were coming to take its place. What we know from the anthropological record is that sometime around 6,000 to 6,500 years ago, there was a people in what is now Ukraine. You know, Ukraine is a source of all sorts of things. What is now Ukraine, which in Greek times was called Scythia, is that they first learned how to do animal husbandry, and also eventually to ride horses for the first time. Riding horses was like nuclear fission in those days. And animal husbandry required movement because animals would graze one place, they would have to be moved somewhere else. And so these people started moving out all across the Russian steppe. They started moving out through the Caucasus down into, this is where we get the term Caucasian for those people. They started moving down, the language group is what we call Indo-European. But before that, it was called Proto-Indo-European. But they started moving down through the Caucasus, which is between the mountain range between the Black Sea on the west and the Caspian Sea on the east, which is now Armenia and Azerbaijan, and moving and fanning it in all directions. They moved across Turkey, they moved across Persia, they moved eventually into India. That was referred to in India as the Aryan invasion. And they moved south into the area of Mesopotamia. They moved eventually into the Levant, in Palestine, and so forth and so on. And they moved into Egypt. They got to Egypt around 1850 BC. They were referred to there as the Hyksos, and they were pastoral nomads. And they, unlike the people that they were displacing, were sun god worshippers. Their god was the sun, and so they were also displacing people whose god was more tied to moon things, lunar people, lunatics, and so forth. And they also, and so these cultures mashed together over a long period of time, and for many generations or thousands of years, there were gods that were both male and female, so even in the Bible culture of the Old Testament, that existed and continued. And in fact, we were, at least I don't know about the rest of you, but when I was brought up in the 40s and 50s and so forth, there was sort of for fairy tale stories about, well, everybody else in the world were polytheistic, with these Jewish people had this wonderful monotheism that no one else had, and they were so much wiser than the rest of the world that we adopted their ways and so forth and so on. And that is a fairy tale. The whole Old Testament is about, in many instances, practices of polytheism. Even the God that's worshipped during the Old Testament time is not the same God from the beginning to the end. The original God is named El, which is a shorthand for Enlil. And sometimes in Hebrew El Shaddai, and that was a Canaanite god. And then when it was later. Hello? Shame on you there, Bill. It was later displaced by a God that we now call Yahweh. And I say we now call that God Yahweh because I don't think that is the Hebraic term for that God. But in any event, that God, I have in the last couple of months in preparation for this talk, as Isabel will attest, I have stopped listening all the time to Bigfoot and dogman stories and have been immersing myself in things on the internet related to this, And so I'm not sure I've become more educated by doing that because those Bigfoot stories are really wonderful too. But in any event, what I learned is that the God we refer to as Yahweh was first mentioned, or the first written mention of that God is in Lower Egypt in around 1350 to 1400 BC. Among a nomadic group from the Arabian Peninsula who were called Shasu nomads. And they over time maybe were among the group that were part of what was referred to as the Exodus. But that group, that Yahweh was not an original, or he was a junior God, if you will. What we can say with some relative certainty is that all the gods of the Old Testament, all of them, without exception, are what we could now refer to, or would now refer to, as ETs, that were having connections with humans on Earth. And they're not, it's interesting, the God that was worshipped by Abraham is not the same God that was worshipped by Moses. Moses worshipped El, and that was the only God that the group, whatever group Abraham was associated with, had connection with at that time. The God that Moses connected with was the one that we call Yahweh. And the tablets that was, the Ten Commandments, one of the Ten Commandments, I can't remember which one it is thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well,
that's the first one. That's number one.
Oh, number one. Okay. Well, as a good ET should do that. Because that itself is a statement that there are other gods. That is a confirmation of the polytheism that was part of that culture. It remained part of from all the immersion that I've done over the last several months. What all the scholars I've heard of say is that polytheism was very, very prevalent in Israel until at least the 2nd to 3rd century BC, and that it was only in the period after the second Babylonian captivity. First, it was only in that period, around 400 to 350 to 300 BC, that what we call the Old Testament, which was the first, was created was put together in the way that the Christian Bible was put together in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. But before that, whether these things were written down or whether they were not codified in a collective. And so it was during that time that they became so, and that the idea of Jewish law and so forth first came into being as such. I've heard a report from a Jewish scholar just in the last week or so saying that until 200 AD and after, that very few people in Israel who were the native people were aware of the existence of the Torah, of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And that this was something that had been created, but it was first created among only sort of an elite, and that it was disseminated only then after the Hellenization of Israel. And in fact, the what we call the Septuagint was created in Egypt in the 3rd century BC, which is I think the first 6, is that the first 6 books of the Old Testament? And that was written in Greek, and the reason it was written in Greek was by that time, because bear in mind, you had Israel existed as a state from sometime around 1000 or so until the first Babylonian captivity around 600 and something, and then they were going for 100 and some years, and they were taken again, and they got back around 400 BC, and in fact, I remember reading one time in the 70s, there was an author named Julian Jaynes who wrote a wonderful book for those times called The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, a very easy to remember title. And in that book, he hypothesized that the name Jew did not exist until one of the Babylonian captivities, and that the reason that it came into being was because it was a Babylonian word for vagrant. The people who had been taken from Israel and I don't know what, Lawrence is looking at me with a very a big frown on his face, but I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's an interest. But I know before the Babylonian captivity period, you had the term Hebrew and Israeli and so forth, but I don't think you had the term Jew or Jewish.
And Judah, House of Judah, tribe of Judah. The tribes of Judah. So that's.
No, I've heard that, but I don't know whether that's right or not. Yeah. The term comes from Judah.
Oh, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I don't know that. And interestingly, too, in terms of the 2 Jewish states, Judah in the north and Israel in the south, Judah apparently never stopped following the god referred to as El. It was only in the Israeli state to the south, which was populated by some of these nomads from the Arabian Peninsula, where Yahweh worship took hold. And the interesting thing about the ET connection is that these gods were all over the world in whether it was in that part of the world or across Europe and so forth. Gods were gods that were specific to areas or groups of people. And so Yahweh apparently was a younger cousin or nephew or something who inherited a group of people who didn't have a country or didn't have any land they controlled, and so he directed them to go ahead and take what became Israel. And if you look at what goes on in the Old Testament, the kind of things that are praised are not the kinds of things that we would associate with God in the concept of God today. I mean, first of all, there was all sorts of commands for killing and conquering and so forth. There's a story involving the king Saul, the predecessor of David, who was ordered to, I can't remember the group, I'm blanking out, but Amorites maybe. Saul was ordered to destroy and kill every man, woman, and child among this group of people. And he only killed the men. And Yahweh punished him severely for not having followed his orders. It was supposed to be a genocide, not just killing a few guys, you know. And so that kind of thing is a frequent reference in the Old Testament. There is also the concept of slavery is all through the Old Testament, and to that extent, it's also to some extent in the New Testament. It was not only accepted; it was part of the fabric, and because humans, as Robert pointed out in his talk last May, to worship a god meant that this is the god that you work for. You were, in effect, the slave of the god that you worship. And that's why you have sayings in the Bible, like there was the motto of the school I attended from the time I was 5 years old, which was, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, what kind of God do we want that wants us to be fearful of him or her or him? That's the kind of God that causes brothers to shoot each other on Christmas Eve, you know? And so, but that's the kind of history we have. And and in terms of the Bible, when the Bible was written or when it was put together, I don't want to say written for sure because I don't know whether some of it may have been written before 400 BC. I think the Jewish figure named Ezra was the one who spearheaded that effort to put it together. But these gods were sort of conflated together in much the same way that when the New Testament was assembled in 500-600 years later in the Council of Nicaea, many things in the New Testament were conflated together to make it a more seamless and coherent document as a whole. When in fact it had not begun that way. One of the things I found really interesting is that there was a first El and then later Yahweh originally had a female consort named Asherah, and there were in many earlier Jewish synagogues there were offering stones for both, on one side for Asheroth and one side for Yahweh, and the offering for Yahweh would typically be frankincense, and that for Asheroth would be ganja. It would be pot, marijuana, and so we have the Pharisees to blame for the first war on drugs because apparently when they were creating the Old Testament, they wanted to simplify things and get the rules straight, and so they didn't want any more female deities, and as part and parcel of that process, they outlawed smoking pot, and so that maybe Richard Nixon, who was the first person to declare war on drugs in the United States, was in a previous lifetime was a Pharisee in Israel, you know. And so anyway, we have a checkered history here, and that's the Old Testament. So what we could say, I think, with some with some certainty is Abraham worshipped a different God than Moses, and Moses worshipped a different God, and both Abraham and Moses worshipped a different God than the one that the Jesus figure in the New Testament. Even though in modern times, all these gods have been conflated into one that we refer to as Yahweh. And according to, and I don't know whether this is accurate or not, but I was listening to one of these things a week or so ago by a Jewish scholar who said that I believe the term Yahweh, or what it was spelled in Hebrew, YHWH. Is that correct? And that during the period after the Masada, where the Jewish rebelled against the Romans, and there was the in 70 AD, I believe, and there was a siege, and they all died. And the Romans were having a hard time pacifying these Jews who didn't cotton to Roman rule. They'd done much better with Alexander's people, who were more less dictatorial, I guess. But and by the way, I forgot to say the reason for the Septuagint was because by 300 BC, after the Greeks had taken over, there were very few people in Israel, who spoke Hebrew, and so they created this Bible in Hebrew that most of the Israelis could not read, even if they could read at all. There were many more people in those days who were fluent and literate in Greek, even in Israel, than there were in Hebrew. And so the whole system, and of course the Greek pantheon was just another version of the pantheon which is the polytheistic pantheon, which had been around in Sumeria and Egypt and so forth for a long time before. So that's the basic thing of the Old Testament, and then we get to the New Testament. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but things don't get a whole lot better then. There's the New Testament, as we know, was created first with the Gospel of Mark, and then with the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and then later with John. A lot of scholarly evidence indicates that Mark, to a great extent, which apparently came in the 70s, they think, but Mark apparently plagiarizes many portions of Homer. It plagiarizes things out of the Iliad and the Odyssey, most of the Odyssey, a relationship, telling stories about Jesus that had previously been told about Odysseus, and so then you have the Gospels of Mark and Luke, and they were Gospels that were apparently based on the same source, which is referred to in biblical scholarship circles as Q, not associated with QAnon, but QAnon may well have taken the name from Q as a source of Mark and Luke. Q is not, as far as I know, it's not something that is known. It's a hypothetical source because there's so much similarity between Mark and Luke, between Matthew and Luke. I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused now. And there was a book written in 1993 by a guy named Richard Atwill called Caesar's Messiah. That book hypothesizes that the whole Jesus story in the New Testament, the four Gospels, was created by the Romans. That it was a story that they commissioned after the Messiah as a way of creating a propaganda piece to try to marginalize the rebellious Jews and to try to create a mythic figure for the Jews who was a pacifist and who accepted the domination of Rome. And that's not to say that there wasn't a real person around whom stories that became the Gospels actually lived. But it is to say that those stories were put together in such a way that was designed as propaganda and more than anything else. And there's that book was treated as a marginal thing originally when it came out 30 years ago. It has gained much more traction in recent years, and there are other scholars who've written other books that are. Atwell was not a typical biblical scholar, but others have come along that are who are supporting his work. There's another one more recently called. Let's see if I can find the name. Well, can't find the name. But anyway, there's an author named James Valiant who's written another one that's similar, and that's not the only one. So this is an interesting storyline. That the idea was that the Flavian emperors, starting with Vespasian, and then his son was the Emperor Titus. Titus was the one who actually quell the rebellion in the 60s in Israel, and starved out and caused the death of everyone at the Messiah. And in fact, the Titus was presented as the Messiah in the law of that time. And it's interesting that some of the things that we take as gospel in terms of our Christian underpinnings are things like peace on earth, goodwill to men. These were sayings that were on Roman coins at that time. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Because the Romans were trying to position themselves as godlike figures. And so, in any event, this is how Christianity got going, and then it remained. We have stories of Christians being persecuted, but most of the stories are probably way overblown. Christians enjoyed pretty much freedom throughout the empire from early on, and in fact, when Constantine created the Council of Nicaea, the purpose was to create a state religion, because Rome up until that time had been a totally pluralistic society, and the state religion because they had controlled land from England, what is now England, until up all the way to Persia and then North Africa as well. They had lots and lots of different groups within the empire. They had about 40 million people within the empire, and there was lots of potential conflict. And so Constantine was looking for a mechanism by which to bring people into one big tent, and thereby to exert greater control over the empire. And that's why he created the Council of Nicaea to come up with a state religion. And that's how Christianity was officially created. That's how our Christian Bible was created. And I read a story at one time, I don't know whether it's true or not, the Council of Nicaea lasted 12 or 15 years, but 3 or 4 years into it, the first task was to come up with a name for the new God that they were going to create, that everybody was going to have to worship. And so they had people from all over the empire that were assigned this task. And 3 years into it, they had reduced the list down to a group of 5 different names, but they couldn't come any closer than that. And one of them was Zeus, one of them was Caesar, one of them was Krishna, because Krishna was big in the East. One of them was Mithras, which was a Persian god that was akin to the Christian tradition, and I can't remember the fifth one. But Constantine visited. This is 3 years into it. This is all they've been working on, and that's all they've come up with. And so he says, all right, I'm gonna get rid of all this dithering. I'm gonna give you the name right now, and then you all build a religion around that. And that's how the name Jesus Christ was born, right there and then. And the name, according to some, Jesus there wasn't a J in Latin at that time, I'm told. But according to some, Jesus was a tip of the hat to Zeus. And I don't know whether that's correct or not. But according to others, Jesus was the pronunciation of some name of a godlike figure in the British Isles, among the Celtic people there. And Christ was the Greek version of Christos. And so what they were trying to do was to bring together according to that idea, they were bringing together the gods of the furthest point to the west and the furthest point to the east, and under one roof, and want to create a law around all that. And that's how we got Jesus Christ and Christianity. And so that, and what they of course started, by 400 AD, the church had solidified its hold as a state organ for the empire. And it had by then developed a strategy to exert the kind of control that Constantine foresaw 375 years earlier. In 400 AD, the literacy rate in the Roman Empire, across the empire, was said to be around 92%. Higher than we have in the United States today, higher than we have in Europe today. And they embarked on and that was a very dangerous trend. Because if people could read, they could gain access to information that God might not want them to have. And so they embarked on a deliterafication campaign, and they were very successful with it. They made it a capital offense to own a book. They made it almost a capital offense to be able to read. And so within 100 years, they had reduced the literacy rate in the empire from 92% to less than 1%. It was like half of 1% 100 years later. This is those wonderful folks who brought us the Dark Age. Yes, Bryce?
You said the council was to come up with a name for
You want
God.
to step up to the mic?
You said can you hear me? You said the council was to come up for a name for God, but then they came up with Jesus. And Jesus was the Son of God, so that's not.
Well, it was the name of what they was going to be the focal point of their religion. A man god, like Dionysius, like Prometheus, the Jesus character is some scholars have taken the position that Jesus is a rejiggering of Dionysius, who was a god in the Greek pantheon, and because so much of Christian virtues and so forth so closely align and mimic Dionysian rites, and mean, we think of Dionysius as a sort of we associate Dionysius with Bacchus and all that today, but in the Greek time, Dionysius was by far the most seriously worshipped god in terms of aspirations for understanding of what reality was all about. And so that it was great. The Jesus figure was also closely aligned with the as told in the Bible stories, closely aligned with the figure of Mithras, which was a biblical figure, but not a biblical figure, was an Iranian or Persian god figure who dated back to around 1700 BC in Persia, among the Aryan group that eventually went into India and so forth. And many of the attributes of both Dionysius and Mithras were appeared to be born of virgin births and have all born on the winter solstice and all this stuff because they were associated with the sun, just like Jesus was. So, does that answer the question, Tom?
Yeah.
So I have an addendum to that. Hey, Tom. So Christos is Greek. So that was a title, but Jesus in the Greek would have been transliterated to Yeshua, which would have been Jehovah, which means the anointed one in Hebrew. So the name that they picked was Jehovah.
Okay, that could be right. I don't know.
Here you
go. And what I'm told, by the way, in the context of that, is that around the time of the Messiah, that the Romans outlawed uttering, they made it a crime for Jews to speak the name of their God. That's why the tradition was that the name was carried on in secret from generation to generation by rabbis. And what I listened just last week to one long video by a rabbi who was a Jewish scholar who talked about the fact that the name that we call Yahweh, that the name was actually pronounced more like not Jehovah but Jehovah. And I don't know, Ross, you have any idea about that?
I think the word is unpronounceable.
Right.
So inevitably there would be variations that would be inaccurate.
Right. But Robert.
Yeah, to pronounce the J as Jah is just an English convention.
Right.
The J is can also symbolize just like a Y.
Right. 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 Well, there we have it from a linguist. So, anyway, so we have one of the things that came to mind in terms of these issues is a book that I read back, and I think people of my age, maybe more than one of us has read. It was a book that came out in the early 50s by a writer named J.B. Phillips called "Your God Is Too Small." And it was very popular to be assigned, in school, particularly in high school, at least in schools that had courses in religion. And I read it in those days, and it was not about what we're talking about today, but the title at least spoke of the theme that we're talking about today. Because if we have gods that are specific to territories or groups of people, all that does is reinforce a separation between people and people. All it does is reinforce separation between people and our environment. I mean, one of the early verses of Genesis where it talks about man being given dominion over the beasts of the field and birds of the air is a good example of that. Where dominion is not the same thing as stewardship. And so it gives us license to pillage and plunder is what it does. And what it is in terms of the Michael teachings, which many of you have heard me speak about before, it is a perfect caricature of a young soul manifesto, because the theme of the young soul is to gain dominion over the physical plane, and so that's what is being ordained in the book of Genesis, in that passage, and we now are at a point in our evolution when we desperately need to evolve beyond that, and so I think we have evolved beyond it in the way of having in these biblical texts having conflated these different gods into one, even into the early period before 2,000 years ago, there was still plenty of polytheism going on in Israel and among the Jewish people. Probably women were secretly smoking pot against the law of Yahweh, and within the framework of the Christian tradition, we see what a failed experiment it was to reduce the literacy rate from 92% to 0.5%. I mean, they were trying to erase history. This was the basis for Ray Bradbury's book Fahrenheit 451, except that the real story was much more gruesome than Ray Bradbury could even put on the page, and so this is the tradition which we came from. When history resumed after 1000 AD in slow fits and starts, the response of the priesthood was to create the Inquisition, to quell it, and the response to that eventually was the creation of Protestantism. But we're still stuck with these small gods, these territorial beings that have come to us from other planets who want us to worship them and be their slaves and kill our friends and neighbors and brothers and sisters. In the name of honoring them. And we need to move beyond that. One reason I think this subject is timely is because in recent times there have been some scientific moves that I think are very, very helpful. One of the problems we have is as a result of the scientific revolution that began with Copernicus and Galileo and Descartes, we transitioned from a culture that was primarily oriented towards the spiritual side of things, or religious side of things, if not spiritual, to a scientific side of things that has lost anything, it's tethered to anything that's sacred. And we have in the process lost our connection with what really are. I mean, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that something that we think of as God does exist, otherwise none of us would be here, because each and every one of us is an integral part of that beingness, of that spirit, of that consciousness. But we have not had a science that has supported that in any way at all. In fact, we've created all sorts of. I made a list of a few isms that we're familiar with, and in terms of that scientific movement, we have existentialism, which we don't think about much today, which transitioned to materialism, which then transitioned into what we today, or science today, calls physicalism, which is sort of existentialism light. It's existentialism without the angst of the eternal return and meaninglessness. Because physicalism is something that apparently we can solve all of our needs for meaning just by having more stuff. And that's why that's what leads to things like happen on Christmas Eve, the story I told you at the beginning, But science believes somehow, most scientists believe that that all of creation is just physical and it just somehow happened and there wasn't any consciousness behind it. And that somehow consciousness in some minute degree has eked its way through because of our brains, because of the physical structure of our brains, and that nothing else in creation has it, which is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard, but that's what some brilliant minds really believe. And then we have atheism, which people feel very negatively very often, but atheism really is what I think of often as the last threshold of genuine spiritual experiences, because when you get to be an atheist, it means you have finally let go of all the programming you've been given from the religious standpoint. And one person that comes to mind in that regard is a very, very prolific writer on Christian history named Bart Ehrman, who is down at the University of North Carolina. He began his life as a fundamentalist and went to Bible school and ended up getting a PhD at Princeton in divinity studies and so forth. And he wrote a book, first time I came across it, he wrote a book about 12 or 15 years ago called God's Problem. And he's written many, many books, probably 25 or 30 at least. And in God's Problem, according to Ehrman, was that if there were really a God, or a God that was able to do anything, there wouldn't be so much suffering in the world. And a lot of people, that's a common theme among people, has been. It's a common theme for Christianity, that it's caused by our original sin. It's in the Eastern side, in Hinduism and Buddhism, it's the eternal recycling of rebirth and so forth, and the Buddhist position that all life is suffering, and the only way to get off, to stop suffering, is to get off the wheel of karma, which is to get free of the cycle of rebirth, and so forth. Some have heard me before say I disagree with that. I think that at the level of soul, at the level of our deepest essence and beingness, our souls really don't care whether we get a cut finger or not. You know, having us suffering at the physical level is just another experience from the soul's perspective. The soul is here to swallow up like a Pac-Man, swallowing pellets of experience in every which way it can. And it does it, every experience is of equal value for the soul, whether it feels good to us as the soul's avatar or not. And so from our standpoint, the fact that humans suffer, or that I suffer, does not mean that there isn't a higher consciousness that's involved. But that's how Bart Ehrman went from being a fundamentalist and then to a speaker for Christianity and so forth, to being, he's still a scholar, but he considers himself an atheist at this point. And perhaps if he lives long enough, he might actually have a spiritual experience that will bring him back into the fold at a higher level. But in any event, that's another ism. We have agnosticism. We have deism, which is not the same as theism. And we have polytheism, pantheism, panentheism, panpsychism, Gnosticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, shamanism, animism, pluralism, dualism. And dualism is a result of what we are having our God tell us to do these days. Whether the God is materialism or physicalism or stuffism, or whether the God is Yahweh telling the Jews that they are chosen, they're the chosen people for a particular piece of real estate, or whether it's the Allah, who is just the Arabic cognate of El, telling telling the Palestinians or the Hamas that they're the chosen people for that piece of real estate. We need a larger perspective than either of those. And what we have today is a scientific movement that there's only a few people involved in at this point. You heard me speak last year of Donald Hoffman, who wrote a book in 2019 called Case Against Reality. His perspective is that it's very Eastern in some respects, and it is that all this.
Shame on you.
Karma, instant karma.
That was Yahweh on the line. I had to hold it. I have more important things to do right now. Anyway, I think I'm getting a heart problem. In any event, dualism is what gives us that sense of separation, sense of separation from each other, as that sense of separation from reality. In concept, what Hoffman's perspective is, from a scientific point of view, is that all that there is consciousness. That's all. And that each and every one of us, and each and every thing that exists, or appears to exist, is nothing but another aspect of that consciousness. That one consciousness. There's one consciousness of which each and every one of us is a part. And this fellow who's at University of California, Irvine, is a really brilliant character. And he's not getting a lot of following among the scientific community of this generation because they're very connected to their existing physicalism paradigm. But over time, I think he will. There are others. There's another writer that I would, I can give a list of resources that I've come up with. And I apologize for not having this stuff on the screen, but my assistant, who usually does all this stuff for me for these meetings, was sick this week and couldn't get it done. There's a fellow named Christopher Langan who's what would be referred to as an autodidact, self-taught, but he has got at least he promotes himself as having an IQ of over 200, so he's a pretty smart guy, and he's written several books on his theory of everything. He's got a theory of everything called which he refers to in shorthand as the CTMU, the Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. And it's interesting because it is another model that is based primarily on consciousness. It's terrible to try to read it. He's created his own language, and you have to learn a new language to even have the vaguest idea what the hell he's talking about. But nevertheless, I mean, it is a way he can show off his brilliance by something other than a degree from Harvard, by creating his own language for this stuff. And but he truly is a brilliant fellow, and he is getting some traction as well. There's a philosopher named Bernardo Kastrup, who some of you might have heard of, maybe not. He's, I think, a Dutchman, and he's all over the internet, as so are these other guys too. He's got a great book called Analytic Idealism in a Nutshell. He's what's called an idealist philosopher. And it doesn't have much to do with God, but it does have to do with consciousness as being the fundamental fabric of reality. Another one is Rupert Spira, who is all over the internet, and he is a former potter who got philosophical and started doing programs, and he is one of the most articulate and eloquent presenters of these ideas I've ever heard. And his most recent book is called "You Are the Happiness You Seek." Highly recommended. In terms of this idea, to support it, I would also say that it's completely consistent with what we know as the law of one, the raw material, which was channeled back in the early '80s by Carl Rueckert, Don Elkins, and Jim McCarty, who was a speaker for us last year and was previously a speaker several years before that in person. And the other, Carla died, it was his wife, and she died about 10 years ago, and Don Elkins died back in the '80s. But the raw material talks about densities of consciousness and so forth. The terminology densities was invented by those channels. And that probably is one of the most complete sets of cosmological or ontological paradigms that's ever been downloaded to humans. Densities in their scheme are nothing more than what they call frequencies of consciousness. And so everything within their scheme is consciousness. And everything we see in what we call the physical is just a manifestation of consciousness. It's what Hoffman would call an epiphenomenon, or an emergent property of consciousness. But ultimately, it's what is also referred to by the Hindus and by the Buddhists as Maya, as illusion. It's the experience we have with it is real for us, but it's not ultimate reality. And from a scientific perspective, this is an interesting thing that Hoffman has brought up, is that the whole space-time paradigm within which physical reality as we know it exists is something that, from the perspective of relativity, ceases to exist at what in terms of space at 10 to the minus 32, 10 to the minus 32 centimeters. And so when you get to that realm of that small, it all blows up. And I don't know whether it's true or not, but Hoffman indicates if you would try to go beyond that, you actually create a black hole. And also in time, it's 10 to the minus 33 or 34 seconds. And so what it means is that this reality is merely a framework for us to have experience. It is a limited framework, just like our visual field is limited. We can see to the wall. Some of you can see better than I can, but we know that our visual field is limited. We only have a certain color spectrum. Our vocals, our sound frequency, audible, is limited as well. That we can't hear a dog whistle with our own ears, but the dogs can hear it. And that's the same way with this reality as a whole. It is a limited framework within which we have experiences, but it's not reality itself. The reality that underlies it, to the best that it can be identified today, is consciousness. And if we recognize that we are part and parcel, each and every one of us, no matter how smart we are, no matter how dumb we are equal and equally valuable parts of that one consciousness. And just as everything else, whether it's living or not, as Hoffman points out, he doesn't know how to interact with a rock. Now, a more traditional person in a more traditional culture can speak with a rock and get have a dialogue. At our level, we cannot, because we're not connected in that way, at least now. But the reason we can't speak with a rock is because of our limited frequency. That's all. That's all. The rock has its own consciousness. Everything in creation is made of consciousness. In fact, going back to you've heard me say this before too, back in the Seth material time of the late 60s, early 70s, Jane Roberts up in Albany was channeling an entity called Seth, which in Michael speak was a mid to upper level causal soul entity. And Seth, they transcribed the channelings and wrote 4 or 5 books out of it. And Seth told us then that all of the efforts of our scientists to find the fundamental particle of creation were completely doomed to failure, because there was no fundamental particle. The fundamental unit of creation is what Seth referred to as a CU, a consciousness unit. And so that this creation is made of nothing but consciousness units. The closest approximation that we can have to that is photons, because we are all and everything within creation. The most that we can measure of it is photons of light, but beneath the photon of light are CUs, and so that if we can get beyond our parochial, our neighborhood mentality about the God that's going to protect us from the next storm, and is going to protect us from our neighbor, or that's going to tell us to go kill our neighbor so we can take what the neighbor has, we'll be a lot better off than we are. I don't know where I am on time. Well, I'm getting kind of close. But it's interesting that how these things happen. I think Robert last May, when he was talking, made some reference to the cargo cults that developed after World War II, or during World War II. All through the Melanesian archipelago in Southwest Pacific, where the war was going on with Japan, and there were lots of planes for the first time flying over. These tribal groups that didn't know what was going on, didn't know who these people were, they created what were later called cargo cults, and they often created idols that were made up to look like they were sticks and twigs and so forth, that they created airplanes. And would stand around and have worship of these airplane images that they created, and within these societies, there was a fellow who wrote a book back in the 50s. I can't call the name of it right now, but who went and did a survey of these things and found that in all over these Melanesian islands that were not connected with each other at all within a relatively predictable period of time, that there would be people who would come along and they would organize the information of these sky gods that were going over it, and they would create lore about the fact that the sky god was going to land and was going to take them to paradise and all this stuff, and would develop all sorts of rules of behavior around these things, and they were referred to as cargo cults. And of course, those cargo cults, now that the natives know that we're not quite as godlike as they originally thought, don't worship us as they did. But our religions, even today, are in many senses not very different from those cargo cults. And we are grown up enough, evolved enough, mature enough, loving enough, that we can go beyond that. And it's damn well time we should. So If anybody has any comments or questions, I'd love to entertain them.
I have something I'd like to mention, because the whole feeling of so the whole feeling that I'm getting from the talk is not been honoring perhaps all religions, which is kind of what I thought this was going to be. So I wasn't sure what the presentation was going to be, but I think I'd be interested in seeing what all the religions have in common. You know, is it light? Is it what is there a common element in every religion that could perhaps unify all these different groups?
I think that's a wonderful question. I wish this is a talk we could go on for a whole weekend about and still just scratch the surface. But all religions do have the idea that there is a higher being or beingness that unites or potentially unites us all. My point in this talk has been that, unfortunately, the religions that we've had have also had within each of them the idea that the God that they worship, or whatever the idea they worship, only unites us if everybody comes within that same tent.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And those who don't are going to go to hellfire and damnation, or they're not human, they deserve killing, all that sort of thing. But the reason I bring up this consciousness idea is that it is an idea through which people can connect in a meaningful way that will transcend the limitations of their religion. Religion, as we know it, is largely cultural programming, and we really the materialism. I brought up and emphasized materialism and physicalism because that has become its own religion. In 2013, I took part in a 6 or 8 week discussion at St. Mary's Episcopal Church with, who started by a pastor there, about the implications of the book Proof of Heaven by Evan Alexander. And I was amazed. I was the only person there who's not a member of the church. These people who were participants in the group, who were about 10 or 12 of them, were mostly regular churchgoers. And very few of them could accept that there was anything beyond this physical life. Even though they're regular churchgoers, they found the story that Alexander told unbelievable, incredible, because they could not believe that anything beyond this actually exists. And so, you know, that's the, we all need to be hit over the head with a cosmic 2x4. So.
Anybody online, just raise your hand if you have a question. I see that you have your hand up already, Roma, so go ahead and ask your question. Unmute yourself, Roma. Okay, well, we'll get back to you. We have a couple of questions in the room.
Tom, they still haven't changed at St. Mary's.
Yeah.
I'm doing my very best to be a light giver, but I'm not getting anywhere.
Keep up the good fight.
No, I didn't get anywhere with even Alexander's book or anything like that. But I did find a book that was written about the near-death experience by an Episcopal minister in Texas who was a skeptic. And then he he ran into people who had had this near-death experience. Many people with the NDE, and wrote a book about it. So I have kind of snuck that book in. Now this was written by an Episcopal priest.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you can listen to this. I'm trying, I really am. Anyway, I got straight on the Old Testament. I was really, really lucky as a college student. because otherwise I wouldn't have understood it. But I had a course in world literature, and I think the professor was Jewish, and we read some beautiful literature from the Old Testament. And he asked a question, which I remember to this day, many, many decades later. He said, what was the Jewish idea of God? Was he their general and their realtor? And I thought, yep, that pretty much describes the Old Testament. So I'm done with that.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear your view about what they call the Christ energy. And I'd like to hear your view about any karma that may be working in Palestine and in the Ukraine.
Well, as to the Christ, the Christ energy, I think is very, very real. What it involves, in my opinion, is an acknowledgement of what I was just talking about, Suzanne. An acknowledgement that we are consciousness. We are, as consciousness, we are limitless beings. And if we we do all kinds of bad things. We can do all kinds of wonderful things and bad things, and much greater extent than we actually do. Because, Dan, can you put up my that chart?
Yeah, I'll have to share screen.
Because the only limit is our own imagination. That's all that limits us. That's all. And I think that the Christ consciousness is an acknowledgement of that, and stepping into that awareness, stepping into that power, stepping into the responsibility that goes with it, and realizing that we're all one, that love is the primary substrate of all creation. Consciousness is another. Love is an expression of consciousness at its deepest level, and to me, that's what the Christ energy represents. Now, in terms of the karma, I've read stories on occasion about people getting in individual souls getting into sort of pendulum type situations where, well, you kill me in this lifetime, and I'll kill you in the next one. And because we love each other so much, we want to learn these lessons together. And at the soul level, we do, not necessarily at the physical level. At the physical level, would just be avatar of the soul playing out these games. And I think that's real, but I think perhaps there's a bit of that going on in the Palestine thing and perhaps in Ukraine as well. Ukraine, it really is the source of this current iteration of civilization, starting back in 6,500 years ago, But whether the karma is there or not, and as you know, I've worked for many, many years with channels and so forth, with higher plane consciousnesses. And the information I've gotten across the board from different sources, different channels as well, is that karma ain't what it used to be. We're going through a transition now where karmic forces will no longer have a hold on humanity that they have in the past. And so what that means is, it doesn't mean we still cannot be whipsawed by them, but we also have the power to make choices to take us in a different direction. And that's where I think we are, that we can choose to let go of those karmas and move on to better things. And it is a situation in Israel and Palestine. I mean, what the Hamas people did in southern Israel was just awful, Doesn't get any worse than that. Do we make up for it? They killed 1,400 people, but they did it in incredibly. They did it in ways that would have made the Nazi Himmler proud, in terms of torture and so forth. Do we make that up by killing 20,000 or 25,000 or 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza? That's not the way the system works. And so, but that is the way the karmic scale works. And so that's, I think we're evolving beyond that. And that's why I think this is time.
Is that the page you want? Is that the page you want?
Yeah, that what I want to point out is this is a chart that you all have seen me put up before. It's one that I channeled 2.5 years ago that my daughter put on a nice pretty display for me. But it shows that all these small circles within the larger circle are universes. There's the ultimate infinite numbers of universes, and the source of all those universes is the line around it says the joyful realm of infinite imagination, infinite illumination, infinite creation, and there's another phrase called infinite beingness we didn't have room for. But that and every universe, every God, if you will, is what is referred to as an extrusion of that realm, an extrusion of the consciousness of that realm. This creation, of which each of us is a part, is an extrusion of the consciousness of that joyful realm. And so I put it up in the context of Suzanne's question because it to me this is what recognizing and embodying and integrating that is what I think the Christ energy is all about. Robert.
Tom, thank you very much for that presentation. I thought it was beautiful. It was a very cogent integration of a very complex picture.
Well, thank you, Robert. Especially coming from you. But I have to tell you, it's a very emotional one for me to have made because I'm still experiencing. I'm not completely sure that when I walk out of here, there won't be a crew out there to burn me to say.
Well, when I gave my presentation on a similar topic, I was afraid to come out and say that, yeah, the Old Testament God was ETs, but you were not afraid of saying that. I love it that you just came right out with it. I also expected your presentation to cover what God is not, which you did really well, but then you went on to say what it is, which is a very elusive thing to pursue. But I like what you came up with. I think that one of the difficulties that we have in defining God as the consciousness that comprehends all it is that there is nothing that stands in contrast to it. And one way we define and learn about things is through contrast, but because everything is God, but what is not. Anyway, I'd like to encourage you to write up your presentation, put it on paper, get it in words on paper. It was so
well.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much. It will be on YouTube, of course, unless I said something that would disqualify, which I may well have.
Very possible. Thank you again.
Hey, can you give me Yahweh's phone number?
I traveled 2,800 miles to attend this talk.
Thank you for coming, Lawrence.
Thank you. And I'm staying. When you spoke of ETs, I guess many of us would assume that meant that we aren't as well. Where'd you get that idea? Where did we come from, if not from the infinite realm of co-creation?
Mm.
You know, in September, you brought me and another person to Kitty Hawk.
Nags Head, excuse me.
At Nags Head, yeah. And we saw the place where the Wright brothers first took flight, exactly 36 years before my birthday. exactly.
Wow.
But 66 years after that first flight, the founder of IONS landed on the moon. Were there no ET intelligences of that character involved with that incredible advancement in only 66 years from the time of horse and buggies to putting a man on the moon?
Right.
And today, we have the technology that exceeds what put the man on the moon 66 years ago.
Right.
We each have that. So, is there indeed any limit to the power we are connected to? It's not just by mechanical devices, but the ability to imagine, as you say. And as Einstein said, imagination is more important than intelligence.
Way more important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here.
Right, right. So, I guess what you're pointing out in your wonderful talk, which I hadn't written so much of Sitchin's work, I saw so much brought out into a broader context in your talk. And it made me aware of how humans have been programmed by a force more advanced than ours, perhaps earlier, if we can even relate to a time scale that has any relevance.
Mm-hmm.
As Einstein said, outside of the solar system as we know it, past, present, and future are simultaneous.
Right.
So when we're able to think outside of that time frame, that paradigm of mentality, then we're able to comprehend something that we haven't had the mindfulness to grasp before.
Right.
And I think your talk has really been a very startling, disruptive mechanism to get us off of the old story that no longer works for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't believe it.
No, don't believe it.
Act on being kicked in the butt.
I could listen to you for hours and hours. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify one thing about Jews being the chosen people. And while it's true that Netanyahu and a lot of people in politics there do believe that Israel is supposed to be, that Palestine is supposed to be one land for Israel, the Jewish people, there are many more Jewish people who don't believe that. That we believe that the concept of being the Jewish chosen people is that we're supposed to be, that God chose the Jewish people to push the idea of monotheism in a time where there was a lot of polytheism. And you'd find that most Jewish people, we do not believe that we are smarter, more adept at business, or more good in any possible, more moral in any way, more than any other people who are not Jewish. So I wanted to tell you that. The other thing is, in case you haven't.
Now I'll tell you, when I went in law practice, it was me and 3 Jewish partners. And all 3 of them were a lot smarter in business than I'll ever be. So I'm going to have to take issue with you on that. I think that is a wonderful. That's why I thought maybe some of them would rub off on me, but unfortunately did not.
No, there's still time. There's still time. The other thing is, has everybody heard about the IONS online seminar that's going on right now that was done in Israel? It's called The One Field.
Huh.
And it has luminaries. It's about consciousness.
Oh, wow.
As luminaries in it, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, and McTaggart.
Well, that sounds great.
And it's free, and you can Google, I would Google The One Field, maybe with Bruce Lipton's name in there to get you to it. It's fabulous. I listened to it yesterday. It's about 2 hours free.
Well, thanks for letting us know that.
Thank you.
I have two.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Two questions. One is, I've noticed an increase in the number of groups forming to do prayers, like around the world. And I'm a member of a few of them. And I'd like to hear your comments about prayer groups and this connectedness. You say there's a disconnection going on, but I kind of looking at an argument that there is more of a connection going on by this disconnection.
We are in a period of transition. We have reached a point with our existing paradigms where all the systems we've created are falling apart of their own weight. They're unsustainable. Our economic models are unsustainable. Our environmental models are unsustainable. Our thoughts about how things work are unsustainable. And so there are increasing numbers of people around the world who are people of minds like us who are gathering together to make connections and to create amongst them with exactly what you're talking about, a sufficient amount of critical mass to start making a difference for the totality. That's what's going on.
Okay. So you're looking more at a macro level. We're at a micro level.
I was looking at the macro level in terms of what has brought us to where we are.
Okay. And then the second thing I want to comment on is I don't see you bringing in, and maybe you referred to it as the shamanic comment, is the Native Americans and the Aboriginal type religions.
Well, what I was saying about that, and I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but what those societies, for the most part, have created as a wonderful balance between themselves and nature. Now, in terms of the Native Americans, they weren't always so cherry with each other in terms of the different tribal groups, there's still disputes about whether the Native American, whether the horses used to be in the Americas until about 10,000 BC, and it's not well understood whether they hunted them to extinction or whether they simply died like the saber-toothed lions and so forth died. But in any event, they certainly, I think that as going forward, I don't think shamanism is not a path. We don't want to revert to shamanism. But we can return to a connection like shamanism offers with each other and with our environment. I think that's what you're alluding to, is it not?
Well, I'm a shaman, so I kind of look at, when you say God, to me, and I'm a Christian too, though, so it's kind of a dichotomy. But
that's okay, you can be both.
So when I practice shamanism and healing people, I pray to Father Sky. I bring energy when I heal people.
Right.
And I bring cosmological energy from Father Sky, Mother Earth, north to south, east and west, and from certain energy from different animals.
What that recognizes is that all of these aspects are aspects of the one consciousness. The earth itself is a being just like we are. It's not like exactly, its consciousness is different, but it's a manifestation of consciousness itself. And so when you call on all these elements, the wind, the sky, the four directions, the sun, the moon, you're calling on other components of creation that we are connected to, just like just like our arm is connected to our trunk,
Exactly.
And so it's perfectly coherent for you to do that and perfectly proper.
Right. But that religion, or that way of thinking is not like many other religions. That's what the shaman, if you think of that as shamanism.
That's why I say we can return to that kind of connectivity but were they going back to becoming shamans or to shamanic rites and rituals where we can return to that? What I'm saying is we're not going to solve our problem by going back.
Yeah.
We need to go forward. If we had not been diverted, and if we go on and continue with shamanic practices to begin with and not been diverted by our ET keepers, we would be a lot more coherent than we are today, I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple people though, they like to have chicken blood. They like to have chicken blood. People can ask me how to do that.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom. So in my practice, I see a lot of people who are wounded and sort of flavors of narcissism because they're identified with the self and the I. And so one of the benefits of Christianity, or a lot of different religions actually, but I guess I come from the Christian tradition, so is forgiveness. Because, and in the Law of One, Ra talks about how forgiveness kind of wipes the slate of karma clean. So a lot of what I spend my time doing is helping people kind of let go of the egocentric identity of self and kind of have an expanded awareness, or the 40,000-foot view, if you will. So if you can, in 2 minutes or less, kind of tell us how we get our heads out of our asses and like kind of have set aside ego so that we can experience the oneness and the unity with the divine consciousness. 2 minutes or less.
Thanks for giving me so much time.
I want to answer that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I think we do individually what we did at the beginning of this meeting, which is to sit with ourselves in stillness, silence, and spaciousness, and feel the love that we all carry with us, that is the universal substrate of everything we've been talking about. And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking about all these various religions is that, at least in Christianity, Jesus said, "Follow me." Now, what I interpret that to mean, and what I think many of the mystics in every religion have indicated, is that do what I do. Do what I do, not what, the church is going to make up.
Be sure not to go over 2 minutes now.
Okay. But I look to the mystics for that commonality. B. Griffiths said that the religions are out here, but when you go into the center of any one of them, you come to the same place, which is that realization that it is all about love.
Right, no question.
So that's my answer to
Well, I think
Martha.
that's a perfect answer. I will say too, Martha, in terms of a personal response to your question, not a general response. With my late wife, Christina, I didn't know why we were born together. I thought it had to do only with our daughter. It turned out it was more than that, and part of what was more than that was that we had only had 7 previous lifetimes together, and 5 of those she had murdered me. There'd been no reciprocity. It wasn't a pendulum type thing. It was just going in one direction. I was allowing myself to be used as a teaching tool for her. And so, but in this lifetime, I became aware of that. And there was a total forgiveness on my part of the fact that all that had happened. And frankly, the fact it didn't happen in this lifetime was a nice change of pace from my standpoint. But in any event, it did, the forgiveness aspect ended the karmic requirement of repetition completely. So it was very, very real in that situation. And so from that, and it's another illustration of what Linda was just talking about. So, thanks.
Tom, one more maybe? It's 20 after 12.
One more, yeah. Well, it's the 28th anniversary, for God's sake, so we go a few
Another,
for God's sake.
Go.
another possible approach. But first, a quick question. Have you found the book called The Book the Church Doesn't Want You to Read? It's good.
No, I have not.
It's very old.
Thanks for letting me know about that, Deborah.
Okay. This comes as a story. Back in the late 70s, when I was in my mid-20s, living in New York City, a fella came into town, invited me to join him at this noon meeting. And I went to the noon meeting, there was a speaker there, and the speaker said, if a frog had babies, and that is all you know, what do you know about the babies? And 25, 30 of us sat there scratching our heads, trying to figure this out. Nobody said a word. And he looked at us and said, if a frog had babies, and that is all you know, what you know about those babies are that they are frogs.
Right.
So how come God's perfect and we are all sinners? And in that instant, it dawned on me that so long as I stand on a platform called I'm a sinner, there is nothing I can do, nothing I can say, no way I can behave that will ever change that situation. The only thing that will change it, pardon my language, is to get the hell off that platform. And so I did.
Right.
And I decided from here on out, I am looking for and living in my divinity.
Right.
All right.
Because
Amen.
beneath all, that's all there is. Beneath all, no matter what your behavior is, that's all there is.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other, is that the end?
Let's see.
Okay, I'm gonna close by reaffirming what Linda just talked about reading this piece that was channeled to me back 32 years ago now on love, because love is the substrate of all we have. This is something that Isabel and I did at our wedding, by the way. She read it in Spanish, I read it in English. Everything we did there, I wish I had 2 hours to talk about that. Gina was there, and it was an absolutely magical experience. And so I want to repeat this here today. This is an answer to my question to my spirit guides, what is love? And this is the answer they channeled to me 3 hours later. It took them 3 hours to make it up. Most people think that love is good, and that bad things like hate, fear, anger, envy, greed, deceit, etc. are the opposites of love, or evidence of its absence. They are neither, however. The truth is, love has no opposite and is never absent. Love, like life itself, is simply all that is. Nothing more, nothing less. Those chimeras some call love's opposites are only love's masks and mirrors to souls as yet unawakened to its true nature and their own. Each of love's supposed opposites can be defined, but who can define love? No one, because, like consciousness, love defines us. We do not define it. Love is the perfect unison within all apparent polarities and guides us in all we do and are, even as we least suspect it. Love enables us to recreate and relive past patterns and to relinquish and transcend those patterns when we are finally prepared to accept and embrace the fullness of the present. Love is at once ubiquitous and inescapable, and it nurtures and sustains us in infinite unseen ways that always exceed the wildest of our expectations, the clearest of our perceptions, the profoundest of our judgments. Love cannot and never will be captured by the words of any language we conjure or to create, to describe or limit it, even by calling it good. More intriguing, more compelling, and to some more baffling than the greatest detective story ever told, love at every moment offers at our fingertips clues of its imminent caress. Just as cosmologists have discovered the quintessential nature of time is translinear, The essence of love, once discovered, is transpolar and omnipresent. The more we knowingly experience love's seamless tapestry in our lives, the more wonderfully mysterious its intricate and elegant handiwork becomes. Love is, beneath all, the deepest mystery of who we are and all that is, and one we shall never fully unravel, no matter how much light the windows of our awareness may shed upon it. Hail to the mystery. In Lakek to each and all of you, that is a Mayan greeting, which, as Isabel indicated, means I'm another you, you are another me. And so in Lakek and namaste to all, and love to all, and thank you for being here, and let's go have some food.
All right, for those of you who are online who would like to get a copy of what Susanna referred to earlier, give me a moment, I'll try to get it into the chat, and then I'll hand this to you.
Oh, that guy.
Okay, I have the information in the chat. I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes if you need to copy the history, and then I'll close the meeting.
Susanna sent me a link to two files. She wanted me to
I'd like to honor that, but I don't I thought, I was sitting there for a minute going, I zoned out, and I zoned back in, I was like, well, maybe I should just send it out to everybody. We're all just different, like instantly.
Oh, I said, copy and paste the link that she sent me by email. I'm gonna have to, I think anybody that wanted it.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting, so see you next month.
Christ consciousness. Rather than,